Hello, I'm the Media Wiz, because one art form wasn't enough. Now, this is the 10th year I've been doing videos for this series, and a couple months ago I've been trying to revisit a bunch of old subjects. Obviously I did Sonichu Redemption because I reviewed Sonichu all the way back in 2015. And today we have another subject that I originally covered in 2015, but with a bit of a slight update. You see, I know I don't really talk about these things all that often, especially not compared to when I first started, but I always like talking about board games, so that's what we're going to be talking about for this video. Like we talked about a few weeks ago with the Goofy Movie board game, the Funko Company have been trying to play catch-up when it comes to making tie-in games. But long before I reviewed that game, I've looked at popular games like Clue, tie-in games based on popular games like MLP and Halo Monopoly, RPGs like Dragon Strike, trend games like VCR games, strange creations like funny penguin game Trap Adventure and Bukkake the card game, and of course, tie-in games based on big IPs like Doctor Who and SpongeBob. But one game I reviewed a long time ago was based on the movie about a board game, that of course being Jumanji, the original tie-in game from Milton Bradly, released in 1995 along with the movie itself. Me and my fellow reviewer Nostalgia Kid reviewed the game at MAGFest 2015 because we both owned the games growing up, and we decided that it would be fun to play the game in the convention's game room. Oh, little did we know how noisy the final product was going to be, what with the type of camera that I was using at the time. We both came to the conclusion that the game was alright, but nothing really great either. Looking back, I still stand by that. It was admirable they wanted to make a game to tie in with a movie about a magical board game, and the game certainly isn't terrible or anything, but certain aspects like obstacles meant to slow players down could have been more effective. Also, I'm still a little miffed that the game pieces are just generic game pieces instead of making them animals like they were in the movie. I mean, even fan-made recreations of the game got that right. Like I said, that video was done in 2015, and it was only my second year of doing videos. And at the time, Jumanji was really only known for one single movie based on one Chris Van Allsburg book, and a shortly lived cartoon show and video game, but I'm pretty sure a lot of people didn't really remember those existed. Jump forward many years after the fact, and Jumanji has eventually gotten rebooted. Because after all, the original film developed a cult following over the years, and Sony, the owners of Columbia Pictures, wanted to franchise out like every other major studio out there. You know, make some of that sweet, sweet nostalgia money. So they decided to reboot Jumanji in 2017 with big-name actors like Kevin Hart, Jack Black, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and switch the premise from magical board game to magical video game system called Jumanji, and turned it into an action-adventure comedy for the whole family. Because, you know, The Rock has a history of doing stuff like that. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of the new Jumanji movies, and it's not that they're horrible. I don't hate them because, ooh, they ruined my childhood or anything like that. I just think they're fine movies that just didn't really stick with me. But I do see why people liked the first movie. Certainly explains why it did well enough at the box office and spawned a sequel just 2 years later, along with its own video game tie-ins. So now we've come full circle. Original movie about a board game gets a board game, and new movies about video games get video game tie-ins. But to shake things up a bit, not only did they make video games for the new Jumanji movies, they also made a board game to tie into the original Jumanji movie, which means we have a new Jumanji board game to look at. Instead of being done by Milton Bradly this time around, this Jumanji game was done by Spin Master, a company that specializes in a lot of family games and stuff aimed at kids, as well as the occasional party game for adults like Tell Me Without Telling Me, which is more in the vein of something like Cards Against Humanity. They have some other tie-in games for things like Jurassic World and How to Train Your Dragon, as well as original games like Beat the Parents and Headbands, with a Z, because the Z makes it sound cool, I guess.
If you put George Bush Z, it's still the same old George Bush. And still...
They also remade the original game with the same box art and remade a lot of the same pieces and game board, but as for this new version of the Jumanji game, it has a surprisingly low score. Yeah, it's not just general product and board game reviewing sites. No, on their own website, it has a 1.5 stars out of 5. Wow. Could it really be that bad? Well, let's journey into the jungle and find out for ourselves. This is Jumanji, the board game, 2022 edition. So the new game is on the top, and the old game is on the bottom, and obviously you can see the old version of the game from '95 That one's a little bit bigger than the newer one. The newer one is a little bit more compact. So when it comes to lugging around the game board, the new one is where it's at. Whereas the old one, I remember that was a huge pain for a Nostalgia Kid when we filmed that review back all those years ago. Other than that, they look pretty much the same. The Jumanji logo is the same. The emblems on each corner of the board are the same. You've got the hunter, who's supposed to be Van Pelt, the monkey, the rhino, and the elephant. Obviously the color schemes are a bit different. The one at the bottom has a lot more like brown and yellow and orange and red versus the other one, which has some green in it, so it kind of shakes things up a bit. So we're going to put the original game aside and we're going to focus more on this version of the game. Bring the adventure to life. Adventurers beware, do not begin unless you intend to finish. The consequences of this legendary game vanish only when the player has reached Jumanji, the center, and called out its name. Use the red dome to decipher riddles, revealing the challenges you'll have to overcome on your adventure through the jungle. First player to reach the game's center wins for the whole group, but beware, if any player runs out of lives before someone makes it to the center, everyone loses. Alright, so let's take the game out of the box. We have the instruction manual here, which has all these little representations of the cards and what are going to be on the cards. Then the instructions on the inside, which go down how the game is played. We have the game board, which is essentially just a smaller version of the game board from the original. And it feels like there's a little bit less going on. But I do like a lot of the gritty kind of detail and the coloring job, especially on the board here, especially when it comes to like the background with the foliage and the little details like the wooden bridge and the waterfall. I like little details like that in a game board, and I think for the most part they did a pretty good job with that. Same thing with these things right here, which are supposed to hold the rest of the game pieces in place. They did a really good job. Lots of good use of like greens and earth tones for a lot of the background pieces here. Here's the red dome piece they were talking about earlier, which is definitely carried over from the 95 version. There is a better version of the game that actually has a green dome that doesn't even require the little card slot so that you can read the cards. But I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And here are the cards that you're supposed to slide into the dome like so that way you can read the challenges and the riddles a little bit better. Like I said, they did this exact same thing in the original 95 version of the game. Here are the dice that determine how much a player can move their piece, but you also have these things called challenge dice, and what these do, they're basically used for challenges. Like the card will say roll on a certain item on the dice, and until you land on that thing you have to move a piece back or something like that, which is an interesting concept, and it's probably one of the few interesting things that the game has going for it that actually resembles something from the original 95 version of the game. There are certain challenges that are also done with an hourglass, which is also similar to the original. And now one of the few things they actually kind of did right compared to the original version is the game pieces actually look like animals, except instead of making each of the pieces look like animals from the movie, like in the movie the game pieces look like a monkey, an elephant, a rhino, and an alligator or crocodile or whichever. Here all the pieces are just rhinos, but they give them different colors, which, I mean, it's a step up from the original game, but still, it's just confusing that they didn't make the game pieces. From the business perspective, considering it's just cheaper to make the same pieces and color them differently, I guess that part of it makes a little bit of sense. And lastly, you have these things called life pieces, and these come in handy throughout the game because you can either take one from other players. I'm assuming if you're playing this with 4 people, you give 3 to each player because there's only 12 that comes in this. But every once in a great while you can probably take life points from another player or gain life pieces if you lose some during the gameplay, because there are a few cards where it says you have to gain or lose certain life points. Okay, so now that we have the box opened and all the pieces laid out, how exactly is the game played? with 2 to 4 players. Each player takes a corner of the board, and you have to make it to the center by staying on the path that your piece is on. To move forward, you roll the standard dice that come with the game, and however much you land on determines how far you can move your piece. Whoever makes it to the center and declaring Jumanji is the winner of the game. Standard stuff so far. Now, since this is supposed to be a co-op game, I think. I mean, they don't really explain it all that well in the instruction manual, and the closest that they come to explaining it a little bit better is, weirdly enough, on the back of the box. Whatever happens to one of the players affects the other players as well, depending on what you land on. Much like the original movie and original game, whenever you move, you're given some sort of jungle-themed obstacle like ferocious animals, plant life, and hunters that are chasing after you. With this version of the game, this is determined by these special cards that you read through this translator piece that goes in the center of the board. Although, in the deluxe version of this game, which came out just a year before, which specifically makes the entire board a fold-out type of game similar to the original movie, they actually went the full mile and made the green dome in the center be automated and have it simulate text in the center by pushing down on it every time a player moves their piece. Here, the cards are used to determine what challenge or obstacle you have to go through. Most of the time it's solving riddles like animal trivia or some kind of charade-style challenge. This tends to be the thing that most negative reviews address about this game, as most of the challenges seem to be things that'll keep kids entertained, like jumping through hula hoops or eating an orange, but most adult players will probably just find this gameplay not all that engaging. Along with these types of challenges, there are other types of dangers like animal attacks, which are elaborated on a little bit more in the instruction manual. These usually determine your next move, or how far you can progress with your next turn, or even if you have to go back a certain number of spaces. Though, if you're able to do certain tasks correctly, you might be able to gain certain advantages, like rolling twice in a row, or gaining extra life points. Because there are life points in a board game now. This is apparently now operating on video game logic. Though I guess that's thematically appropriate, because the new Jumanji movies are about a magical video game system. So overall, meh? I would say it's on par with the other one, but I think I actually like the gameplay in the other one slightly more than this one. Look, this game has plenty of good things in it. The detail that they put into the presentation is certainly up to snuff, the game board is lovingly illustrated and nice to look at, and the gameplay is easy to follow, but there are just some things that really signify this game is mostly for families and especially younger players. Some of the challenges and the roleplay portions definitely highlight this. Also, I can't get over how lacking the manual is when it comes to explaining the co-op part of the gameplay. The box does a better job at explaining that. The box that the game comes in instead of the instruction manual itself. Are some of the low review scores a bit harsh? Maybe. I mean, it is a playable game, and I've certainly played worse. But I don't know, in comparison, the original game had a better sense of consistent gameplay without having to rely on roleplay or a lot of the challenges. Compared to this one, it was a much simpler race to the center that occasionally sent players back, delayed turns, or gave the players extra rolls of the dice. Unless you're desperate for a family game night or you're babysitting, I'd recommend the original Milton Bradly version instead. Or hell, get the deluxe version of this game. That seems to have better reviews and a game board that actually has a center dome thing that doesn't require sticking cards into it. But anyway, I still have plenty of other tabletop games in my review pile, so which will I possibly do next? Doesn't really matter, since next board game review I'm going to be doing is going to be in August, so yeah, I got plenty of time to figure out which one it's going to be. No, next Media Wiz review is going to be on a video game, based on a movie, based on a board game. Because that's not confusing or anything. Until next time, I'm the Media Wiz, because one art form wasn't enough. You know, I would ask why they didn't try to make a new updated version of the Zathura board game, but then I looked at the box office for Zathura and realized, oh yeah, it was the one that wasn't as popular as Jumanji.